What's going on, guys? G2 here. Welcome back to the channel. And this series, we did one on AR platform malfunctions, issues, and how to diagnose them. And based on your feedback, we're going AK. And the two different platforms could not be any more different than what you guys are about to see in this series here. The AR platform is very easy to diagnose. All the parts, for the most part, are mil-spec to a standard. And when you get into the AK platform, that is just not the case, because you have hundreds of different manufacturers, countries of origins, parts. It's really going to be a little bit more difficult, but we have been able to nail this down to 3 or 4 main areas that you need to look into. And as well, in this series, we're going to be going over tips and tricks to help you work your AK a little bit more efficiently. So one of the most important things to remember is no matter what firearm you're using, whether it has a malfunction or whether it's working fine, ensure that the gun is cleared, safe, and okay to work on, transport, and or display for your safety and for the safety of those around you. This particular AK was a build that we did on the channel. If you didn't see it, check it out right here. We'll link that. It's an 18-part series. Yeah, 18 parts to build this. That's what it takes. Not 2 parts that it takes for AR. 18 parts to build an AK. So check that video if you haven't out already. Without further ado, let's get into the topic for today.
So with the AK in particular, it's going to fall into one of 2 categories. You're going to have one that you purchased brand new, right? You may have one that you purchased used, one handed down to you used, or you're going to go into an 80% build. Now, those 2 situations are pretty much going to change how you look at this. When it comes to an existing rifle, and this was true with the AR platform as well as the AK, when you're talking about an existing rifle, new, used, experienced, whatever we want to call it, when we get into that, typical issues with cycling, with light primer strikes, are really due to your components. Wear and tear on your parts, just your internals slowly wearing down. Now, I will say, when you compare the two, the AK versus the AR, these components, because there's so few in here, wear down at a much slower rate than the AR. And a lot of that has to do with the piston-driven system of the AK platform compared to the direct impingement gas system of the AR. Now, when you get into home builds, right, you're building a set from nothing and you're putting it together. That's where a lot of the issues are typically root caused back to your build itself. So something happened during your build that you messed up on. Those steps, those preventative steps, the practices that you do when you're making that build will determine whether this works at the end or not. If it doesn't work at the end, there's really not a lot that you can do without really making a lot of adjustments and redoing a lot of things that you've already done. The biggest issue is the magazines. AKs are so finicky with their magazines. And a lot of that has to do with there's not a standard. There's no mil-spec for the AK platform. Remember, you've got your Russian, your Bulgarian, your East German, your Egyptian, and everything else underneath the sun. All of them are going to be a little bit off. They're not going to be totally the same. So in particular, when you're talking about your magazines not fitting, what we're talking about is your actual magazine fitment. So inside here, from your magazine cutout, you have your magazine release lever here. You have your magazine stabilizing dimples. And then you also have these little rails which support their magazine supports, and they support that magazine, and they're on either side. This is you got it. Yeah, we go. There's a really good shot. So there's your dimple that supports, and then you have this rail here. Now, when you do a home build, this rail is really long. So if you didn't watch the video on magazine fitment when we did our build, if you go to put this magazine in, now we're using dummy rounds in here, and it doesn't click, right? It doesn't even fit. It means that those rails are rubbing along the magazine and not allowing you to fully seat it. What you need to do is, before you start your build, you need to grind down these rails a little bit, and then once it's all installed, you work each magazine in there till you get a good fit for all of them. Magazines, I said, are very finicky. So we have a Bakelite here, we have a Tapco, I have Magpols. All of them are going to fit a little bit differently because of the material they're made out of, especially the metal, whether they're new or whether they are mill surplus magazines. All are going to fit a little bit different. So when you're fitting your magazine, you're going to see there's always going to be a little bit of left to right wobble. That's okay. You don't want a lot. Just bear in mind, because all of the tolerances of the magazines are different, the wobble for some may be none, and for others may be a little bit more. So we can see, because this Bakelite is a little thinner, it's got a little bit more wobble to it, as opposed to this Tapco, which is a thicker polymer, doesn't move nearly as much. So keep that in mind. When you're building this, you want to use all of your magazines to fit, knowing that some will wobble a little bit more than others. The most important thing is, when you're doing this, the wobble back and forth. So this way and that way is what you want to stay away from. That'll stop the feeding issues. Another issue that comes up is, again, with magazine fitment. You may get to the point where this magazine wants to go in, but it won't fully lock, or it'll be really tight and it won't seat. It won't go that extra little bit to lock in, okay? That is really from one issue. Now, I've watched videos and I cringe every time I see this. We talked about this in the particular video for the AK. People say, just grind down the back of your magazine. Don't just grind down the back of your magazine, okay? Guys, what you need to do, there's two steps, two different paths that you can take for this. One, you can replace your magazine lever. The reason that that magazine is not fully seating is not because that indentation is too big. It's because the space right here between the plate and the magazine lever is too skinny. So all you need to do is grab a little file and then just put that file in there and slowly bring it back. So you can do this without removing your magazine release. If you wanted to fully redo it, you can always basically drill this guy out, take the magazine out, take this off, file it down that way, and then reinstall it. You're going to need to get yourself a new pin for your magazine release, and then you'll need to flare the end so it doesn't back out. Don't trim these down. This is not the problem. This is the problem. And when you do this, again, test every magazine individually. Make sure that they all fit. You don't want to have an AK that only runs Tapco or only runs Magpul. You want them to be able to run all of your magazines without issue. That way you're not limited to the magazines that you can run with your particular rifle. Remember, the AK was designed so that any person could pick this up and use it. They were not military trained. They would give these to farmers. They would give them to, just your average Joe when the time came. You can basically drop off a crate of these to a village and these guys are going to be able to use them no problem with minimal training. I mean, all it is, put the magazine in, charge it back. You got a big old safety lever right here that you can't miss. Up is good, down is dead, and that's it.
Well, I hope that helped you guys out. There's a lot when it comes to diagnosing AK. A lot of the issues can be stemmed from a commonality with magazine fitment, and that's kind of going to be the trend here. But there are things that you can do, especially if you're building, that you really need to focus on. The devil is in the details, especially with the AK platform. But here's the good thing about this. Once you get it running, all you ever need to worry about is just maintenance on the parts. And for the most part, these parts last for a very, very long time because they are strong steel construction. So typically replacement, you're not going to have to deal with too much in your lifetime. As always, if you're ever having issues, maybe my video didn't touch on exactly what your specific problem is, drop me a line right here and I'll get back to you. Leave it in the comments below. I'll get back to you there as well. Until next time, make sure that you're practicing safe weapons handling and treating every weapon as if it was loaded. God bless America. G2 out.